Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So I want to go over a little bit of information, data analysis, and for many of you, you're not going to be interested in this video. It's going to be a little bit too detailed, perhaps for many of you. Many of you just expect to answer or to ask the questions that have been asked 1,000 times before and have the answer delivered to you on a plate. Depending on my mood, I may do that, or I may give you a sarcastic, funny answer. But I wanted to address using some data that's been published, published by the government and interpreted by a smart guy called Nguyen. I wanted to explain how we can understand the capacity of each embassy and what they're doing, whether they've resumed normal services for immigrant processing, whether they are processing DV visas in the same way that they used to. The data is quite revealing, and it can tell you a lot about the embassy that you're thinking of using. Now, it only tells you today's scenario. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future. And so, I'm getting, kind of frustrated answering these questions that are roughly along the lines of, I'm at Embassy A, my case is going to be current, God knows when, but do you think I should switch to Embassy B because they're better today? Well, they might be better today, but in 3 months from now, when your case becomes current, it may not be better, right? So you have to be very careful that you're not jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. The first step of that is to understand what your particular embassy is doing, what they're saying, what information they're publishing, etc. And also, if you are considering a move to another embassy, do the same process for that embassy. Understand what's normal for them, what capacity they normally have, and have a little bit of a think about what that could mean for you. So, okay, so let's get into the data. So I'm going to show you my screen here. Let's see. Let's get a nice way of looking at this. Yeah. The data is published by the team at Save Diversity Visa. They've done a pretty good job of showing some data. Obviously, you know that we can get the daily statistics. It shows how many 2NLs are sent today, etc. How many cases each of the posts have. We'll come back to that a little bit later. They've just recently, in the last few days, they've published this other visualization of the data. This is again based on the CEAC data, but just showing by consulate, what the consulates have done in terms of the different regions, etc. This is quite a nice visualization, a different way of looking at the same CEAC data, but it's still based on the CEAC data, okay? Now, there is another visualization they've created, and I've been using this for a little while now. It's pretty interesting stuff. This is based on a different data set, though. So this is based on the issuance data that comes from the government. So if you Google monthly issuances, if you Google monthly issuances, you can get to this page, which shows the official data that the government are publishing for how many visas they've given out. So, for example, in this latest report, we can see that the issuances by post in Abu Dhabi, they had approved 2 DV cases, right? Okay. So, and then you could go down and see Accra did 1 case and so on. This is for December of 2021 for fiscal year 2022, right? So you can get all the data for all the visa types. And that's what Nguyen has done. And he's taken that data for the last few years since October of 2017. This refreshes every once in a while, so I'll need to move fast at some point. But this data is really quite revealing, right? Now, you can look at a particular embassy, you can look at all of the regions, all of the countries at the same time. Right now, this is the starting format. None of the filters here are set. And so this is numbers around the world. You can quickly see that since October 2017 to March 2020, there was somewhat of a regular process. There was an annual sort of speed up, if you like, towards the end of each year. There's differences in each month. I've spoken about that in the past. Then you can see the impact of COVID. COVID basically stopped all operations. It certainly killed DV, but as you can see, there was a little bit of visa issuances going on in some of the embassies here, right? And you can see as I'm moving around here, you can see the embassies. But we're interested in immigrant visas firstly, and it's probably right to just separate out the immigrant visas from non-immigrant visas. So let's just sort of do that first of all. We'll look at just immigrant visas. And you can see that there's all sorts of visas here. All the visa types are issued here. It's color coded. You can have a look at the data. We can see that DV cases, if we have a look at those, where are they? They're either DV. Recently, the color coding for DV is a sort of a green color here, and it's just all DV. Up until a couple of years ago, the cases were classified into DV1, DV2, and DV3. DV1 is the main applicant, DV2 is the spouse, and DV3 is any children of that case, right? And so those numbers were broken out previously. They're now all bundled together in one number. They're not separated out by the visa class, DV1, 2, and 3. So if you want to see what happened, for example, in last year, in 2021, you can see that in June, for example, globally, there were 1,552 visas issued for DV and this is according to the official numbers, 1824 for the month of July, 4,155 in August, and 8,770 in September, right? You can also then see you can barely find, in fact, I don't think you can even find the DV visas in October, because I think there were, 4 globally. It's just too small a data set. It jumps past that. And you can begin to see the data as it appears in December. Now, as of today, we're in February. They have not published the January numbers yet. So these numbers currently are only showing up to December. Okay, so there's a little bit of a lag time when we get the official data, and then that will be interpreted and be put into this visualization. So this is interesting, right? If we look at before, whereas I showed you, for example, the 8770 number there in September of last year, we can look at previous times and say, okay, well, how about in September 2019, which was pre-pandemic? How many visas were issued in that month? 3,597. Why was there such a, and that's DV1. DV2 was 1,500 and DV3, 1,800. So 3,000, 6,000, nearly 7,000. Okay, so nearly 7,000 visas were issued in September. It's pretty close to what they did in September of last year, but obviously September of last year was more of a push. There were lawsuits happening last year, and so that really, pushed them. Okay, so then let's start thinking about an individual embassy. And what I want to show you is the capacity for issuances, right? Now, the capacity for issuances is not exactly the capacity for 2NLs. You have to understand that some cases are denied at interview. Some are put on AP. Some people don't turn up, right? So the ones that don't turn up stay as ready. The ones that are put on AP either show as AP or they're in a refused status, and they may become either permanently refused or they may become issued later. And then, of course, there's issuances, right? So let's say we saw 3,000 interviews. That might mean that 2,500 of them roughly, let's think, but 2,500 of them roughly, we would expect those to be adjudicated and either refused or issued, one or sorry, I would expect those to be issued. So I'm thinking the refusal and no-show and AP rate is going to be something like 20 to 25%, right? So it's going to be in that range. We don't know exactly what it will be going forward, but and it will vary by country and so on. But just understand that in order to get 1,000 issued visas, you need more than that. You need more people being interviewed than that. And also understand the difference between cases and derivatives, right? So there are more people turning up. So yeah, to get 1,000 issued visas, you probably need, let's say, 1,300 people being interviewed, and that probably means something like 700 cases, something along those lines, right? Roughly. Okay, let's have a look now. Let me just refresh this. We'll have a look now at immigrant visas, and I'm going to pick a couple of embassies specifically so that we can look at those embassies and we can figure out a couple of things, right? Again, I'm going to switch this on to immigrant because I think that's relevant. The amount of effort they put into immigrant visas, is apart from the non-immigrant visa pace. So we need to look at it that way. I'm just going to pick an embassy here. Well, let's pick Riyadh because somebody had asked me about Riyadh the other day, and I promised that I was going to do this video, and so I've been wanting to do this one. Whoops! What I should have done is turn them off. Slide down now to Riyadh. Where are you, Riyadh? Riyadh. There we go. Okay, so this is Riyadh, right? Now, what can we tell from this view, right? Let's firstly look at the pre-pandemic data to roughly ascertain what was the capacity of the embassy, because that's an important point. How big is the embassy? How many interviews for immigrant interviews can they do in a normal world? So pre-pandemic is everything up until this point, right? So you can see if we just, it's just an eyeballing thing. I'm not going to calculate this data precisely. I'm not going to take a precise average here, but I'm going to say that months like this were unusual. The September, August and September times. I'm going to say very quiet months. I don't want to take those into account. So I'm going to sort of draw a line, if you like, across a point where I think is the average. And it would look to be something like 120 issuances a month. And again, let's understand that probably means 150 people being interviewed. And as far as DV is concerned, it's probably something around about 70 cases being interviewed. But we can also consider that same thing for other cases, right? Now, so let's say the capacity of the Riyadh embassy is able to churn out something like 120 cases per month. Right. We can also look at that from a DV perspective. If we look at this number here, we can see these colors, 31, 20, and 54. Those are the DV visas in the month of July 2018. Right. So 105 cases of the 180 cases in that pretty busy month were DV, so more than half, right? So, and if we look at some other month, a quieter month, we can see that DV here took 15, 10, 20, so roughly speaking, 52 visas, right, out of 130, roughly, and so again, close to half, right? You can see that Riyadh, in other words, has a capacity to issue something like 120 visas per month on a normal pre-pandemic month, and in pre-pandemic times, DV represented at least a third of those. Okay, at least a third, so roughly a 2-to-1 spread. So we would be expecting to see, therefore, that embassy had resumed services after the pandemic, and they were achieving a 2-to-1 spread in terms of non-DV to DV immigrant visas, right? That's the point I'm trying to get you to understand. Now let's look at what they actually have done. You can see in March of 2020, pandemic hits. They close down. They do almost nothing. Just ignore all that data. It doesn't matter. We can see, actually, you can see in September, this is what they did as a result of the Gomez lawsuits. Gomez, Acker, Kennedy, Mohammed, Fongjong, all of those lawsuits, right? That activity there on DV is purely because of the lawsuits that happened in September. Because we got a judgment on September 4th of that year. But other than that, you can see that the capacity was sort of scaling up, right? Now, ignore for a minute this data for 2021. This is DV cases from 2021. Just ignore that. But what's interesting is the capacity question of this embassy. Well, in immigrant visas, they're achieving in November and December of 2021, they're achieving almost 250 issuances, about double the average in November and December of 2021, right? So in other words, Riyadh Embassy is not only back to its normal capacity, it's actually achieving more capacity. It's trying to deal with the backlog that we see in general in immigrant visa processing, right? They're actually doubling the capacity. Okay, so before we said their capacity was 120. Now they're showing their capacity to be something like 250. Before, there was a 2-to-1 spread, let's say 80 out of the 120, something like 80 to 40 visas in terms of non-DV versus DV. What did they do in November, December? Well, you can barely see it, but there is 4 issuances in Riyadh in December, and that's it. Okay, that's all there was, right? So they managed to increase capacity, but in December and November, they didn't do any cases at all. Well, that's not a surprise that they didn't do DV cases. It's annoying, but it's not a surprise. We already know that, right? But what is surprising is that they did 250. Issued 250 immigrant visas. Okay, we will soon get the January data. It'll be interesting to see how that changes. But the next step on is to say, okay, what are they doing today? And you can have a look at the website for Save Diversity Visa to figure this out. If we have a look here and we say, okay, what has Riyadh done? Riyadh. There we go. Let me just put. Okay, so we got 3 references of Riyadh, right? So we can see that so far in Africa region they've got 56 cases, right? Then we can see if we scroll down a little bit, they've got 79 cases in the Asia region, which is logical, and then what's this European region? I guess. Yeah, this is EU region. They've got 1 case, right? So 79 plus 1, call it 80, and then African region. So total of 136. Okay, 136 cases. Roughly speaking, I'm going to roughly double that. We've got the numbers there, but roughly double that. So as of today, right up until today, right? They've accepted, Riyadh have accepted in January, February, and March 136 cases. Okay, doesn't seem great. Call it an average of 40 cases a month, 45 cases a month, maybe 90 people a month, etc. That's going to be their pace of DV going forward. Are they back to normal in terms of processing? They're getting there, but their capacity now shouldn't be considered to be the 120 because they've proven they can do 250. So what they should not be saying is, well, hang on, we've only got space for 10 cases per month for DV. They shouldn't be saying that. And so the question about whether they're applying a tier 4 type prioritization or not, we can answer by understanding the capacity and understanding how many cases they accept on a monthly basis going forward, right? We can see they've got 136 cases that they've taken for the first quarter. We won't see that data in the official data set for some time, but we know what the capacity should be. They should be able to maintain that 250 number. So it'll be very interesting watching Riyadh going forward. Now, if I was scheduled at Riyadh, this would make me feel a little bit more confident, right? Because I can see that, okay, they're roughly speaking, they're doing about 45 cases a month, roughly. It's probably scaling up a little bit from that in March. And that seems reasonable if they're going to issue something like 80 to 100 cases in a month out of the 250 capacity. That seems reasonable. They've doubled their capacity, and it seems reasonable that they're not applying any longer, at least after March. They're not applying any tier 4 type prioritization. So if I were at Riyadh, I would feel comforted by that data. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's do a similar exercise, and you can see how we've got to put this sort of official data, up until the point we have it, alongside the current data that we have, and then make some assumptions, right? Let's do the same thing again. I'm going to refresh this page because it's going to refresh anyway. Let's pick another embassy. Again, we're going to say immigrant visas. We're going to choose another post. Let's say. Let's pick Paris, right? Just randomly. What I'm expecting you to do is to understand my technique here, understand the tool and the technique, and do some investigation for yourself and decide for yourself, okay? So here's Paris. You can see that Paris had, on a typical month prior to the pandemic, let's just pick this month. This is February of 2018, right? They had 14 plus 6 and 6. What? 6, yeah, okay, 26, right? So DV cases in February, they had 26 out of an average of what looks like about, maybe they're averaging around about 90 cases a month, roughly. Okay, that's their pre-pandemic situation. Where are they at now? Well, let's look at November and December again. They are back to normal capacity, according to this data, according to their official data. They're roughly back to normal capacity. And then we've got to see, okay, does that make sense? They were roughly issuing a sort of a 3-to-1 ratio between non-DV cases and DV cases previously at in Paris, and now they seem to be achieving at least 100 cases per month. In these are 2 quiet months, by the way, November and December. You've got Thanksgiving and Christmas, so don't tell me they're not going to do this in January and February. They should do at least these numbers. Same with Riyadh, where I was picking the 250 a month. They should be doing at least that in January, February, right? January, February, March. Okay, so if there's roughly a 3-to-1 split in DV, then we would expect the Paris embassy to be able to do 30 to 40 DV issuances in a given month, right? So again, we go and let's have a look at the stats here. We'll search for Paris. Paris have got, this is basically for the first quarter. They've got 24 cases in that region, 5 cases there, 29. This is EU, another 25, so 54. So in 3 months, they've taken on 54 cases, roughly 100 people. They're doing okay, right? They're not blatantly disregarding DV. They're doing okay. They're not set the world on fire, but that's okay. If they can now achieve a pace of scheduling something like 25 or 30 visa interviews per month, which would mean about 50 to 60 people, that would be a good pace for Paris, right? So you can see where I'm going with this, right? Now, I'm not going to do this for every single embassy. I want you to be able to actually use this data. I'm teaching you to fish. I'm not giving you a fish, right? You can do this for any embassy you like. So there's no need to ask me about the averages. But what I want you to think about is, what's the capacity in normal times of your embassy? Has your embassy returned to that capacity? Is the second question. Have they, in immigrant visa processing? And are they somehow mistreating or deprioritizing DV in comparison to their capacity, right? Let me think of well, actually, let's just pick on one that's clearly doing that, right? Let me just take another country here. Let's see. Turn off Paris. Let's have a look at Accra. My friends at Accra. Okay, Accra, pre-pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic was able to issue in immigrant visas, an average of, let's say, 450, nearly 500. They were a busy embassy, right? Now they haven't, even in November, December, they haven't returned to anything like that capacity. And don't forget, in Accra, the chance of denial is very high. So for them to be issuing, for example, let's pick a May 2018, right? So they actually issued 55 plus 14 plus 11, 25. So 80 visas, right? So they did 80 visas in the month of May 2018, issued. That probably meant that they had 3 times that in terms of number of people they saw. They probably denied that many people, right? So they were doing a lot of interviews a lot of DV interviews in pre-pandemic conditions. And right now they've only got back to doing, 250 or so. And if we look on the data that brings us up to date, what's going on there? Control F. No. Okay, Accra, they've got 40, and I'm glad to see they've done at least this, but 40 cases so far. It's not enough. I mean, they're clearly not doing the job, right? They've got 40 cases spread over the first 3 months of this year. Their capacity, their average capacity pre-pandemic was, at least 400 or 500 cases. They were probably doing 200, cases per month pre-pandemic in a typical month, in order to issue that sort of 60 to 80 visas we were seeing issued. They were probably doing 200 cases or 150 cases at least. And now in 3 months, they've done 40. It's clearly pathetic, right? So Accra, as I've said before, there's a special place in hell for people that just ignore decent people and won't give them a fair chance. And I don't appreciate Accra's denial perspectives, but I also don't appreciate their laziness. And that, frankly, is what that means, right? There's a reason why you haven't returned to that. You're going to tell me it's pandemic reasons, it's COVID reasons, but the people in Ghana don't agree with you. They're not aware of this big COVID problem that there is, that apparently is stopping you doing your work. So come on, Accra, pull your finger out. Anyway, you can see the point, right? This is how you get the average number of cases that they can handle per month. You have to put a little bit of thinking behind it. You can find out whether they've returned to normal capacity. You can find out whether they have, whether they're taking DV cases and whether they're deprioritizing DV cases. And when we know all of that information, we can do a proper job of compiling the shit list, right? And there are some embassies which are obviously totally pathetic. Let's have a quick look at Cairo. Cairo is massively important. People, there was one guy who was whining about racism against Africa. Because Africa's not seeing a lot of 2NLs up until at least the last few days. But if you take Cairo out of the mix, if Cairo is not operating, if Sudan's not operating, that's a hell of a lot of people that are just not being interviewed. And you can see Cairo was a massively important center for DV processing. It was doing, in pre-pandemic times, it was doing 500 odd average cases. But look at the DV cases. There's almost half of the cases they were doing were DV cases. Today, they haven't reached their pre-pandemic capacity, but they're doing no cases. They haven't accepted, almost no cases at Cairo, if any. 13, I think, is the number. It's like, what's the excuse? Your embassy is there. Basically, half of everything that Cairo was doing prior to the pandemic was to do with DV in immigrant visa processing, and now they're not doing any of it. It's not justifiable at all. So you can see how you can use the data. Okay, please have a look at this data. I'm going to put the link to this data in the YouTube description below the video here. You can go and have a look at this yourselves. Thank you to Noyan. I've been talking to him for a few days. I've used this data and I've shown this data before. I didn't want to publish the URL because I wasn't sure that Noyan was okay with me doing that, but I've checked with him. He's okay with that. And he said that he's going to continue to load this data as the official data is published. So that's a tremendous resource that we can use to figure out what our embassies are doing, okay, or in this case, for example, not doing. Okay, everyone, I hope that's interesting and helpful to you. For those of you that like to sort of crunch the numbers and understand the data and do your own thinking, and I appreciate those sort of people. I don't always agree with you all, but I appreciate you thinking, and I like to be, I like the discussion that causes. All right. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for your time. Keep well. Bye-bye.